Single mom saves a stranger in the wilderness. What he whispers leaves her speechless. Sarah had always been a dedicated single mom, putting her son's needs first, no matter the cost. For years, she balanced work, parenting, and managing her own life with little time for herself. It was exhausting, and sometimes she wondered if she was doing enough. Despite the challenges, she loved her son more than anything, but deep inside, she felt a yearning, a longing for peace and time to recharge, to remember who she was outside of being a mother. One rainy afternoon, after yet another busy week of juggling work deadlines and managing the house, Sarah decided she needed a break. It had been a while since she'd done something just for herself, and she knew it was time to step away. She had always loved nature, and the mountains nearby offered the perfect escape. It wasn't a luxury vacation, just a few days of solitude in the wilderness where she could hike, breathe in the fresh air, and clear her mind. She called up a friend to arrange care for her son and packed her bags. Sarah wasn't new to hiking, but this trip would be different. This was her chance to leave behind the noise of everyday life. No emails, no deadlines, just the open sky and the sounds of the forest. The next morning, she drove out to the wilderness, the mountains rising in the distance like giants guarding the land. The beauty of it all took her breath away. As she parked her car and unloaded her gear, she felt a sense of freedom she hadn't known in years. There was something magical about the place. The air was crisp, filled with the smell of pine trees and fresh earth. The gentle rustle of leaves in the wind calmed her. It was as if nature was inviting her in, telling her to relax and let go of the worries that had clung to her for so long. Sarah set out on the trail, her backpack comfortably strapped to her shoulders, her boots crunching on the dirt path. The sun filtered through the trees, casting a warm golden light across the forest floor. She smiled to herself, feeling the tension in her shoulders slowly fade. She hadn't realized just how tense she had been until she was surrounded by the peaceful quiet of the wilderness. As the day wore on, she hiked deeper into the forest. The sounds of civilization faded away, replaced by the chirping of birds and the rustling of small animals in the underbrush. She followed a narrow path that twisted through the trees, each step carrying her further into the heart of the mountains. She had always loved this feeling, the sense of being alone in the world, surrounded only by nature. It was a reminder of how small she was in the grand scheme of things, and for once, she didn't mind. It felt freeing, like she could take a deep breath without the weight of everything on her shoulders. The hike wasn't difficult, but it was challenging enough to make Sarah feel accomplished. She enjoyed the quiet moments as she walked, sometimes pausing to sit by a stream or to admire the view from a ridge. Each time she felt more connected to herself, her thoughts slowing down and her heart beginning to lighten. By the time the sun began to dip below the horizon, Sarah found a small clearing near a lake where she set up camp. The gentle ripples of the water were soothing, and as the sky turned from blue to shades of pink and purple, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. That night, as she sat by the campfire, Sarah reflected on how far she had come. The past few years had been full of struggles, balancing work, raising a son alone, and trying to keep up with everything that life demanded. But out here in the wilderness, none of that mattered. She could just be. The fire crackled, the flames dancing in the cool air, and Sarah smiled, grateful for this moment of quiet. She hadn't realized how much she needed it until now. The simple act of being away from it all, breathing in the fresh air, and enjoying the beauty of nature made everything else seem smaller. Sarah felt her soul begin to heal in the stillness of the mountains. It was a kind of healing that only nature could offer. No distractions. No worries, just the forest, the sky, and her own thoughts. As she sat there watching the stars slowly fill the sky, she made a vow to herself. She would find a way to do this more often, no more putting herself last. She deserved this peace. It was something she had been neglecting for far too long, but Sarah wasn't prepared for what would happen next. The next morning, after a restful night under the stars, Sarah packed up her camp and set out for a new trail. She wasn't in a rush. There was no schedule. She could go wherever the path took her. The air was cooler that morning, and the sun had barely risen, casting a soft light over the landscape. She could hear the sounds of birds calling to each other in the distance, the forest coming to life with the dawn. Sarah followed the path, the only company being the occasional rustle of leaves as animals moved through the underbrush. It was peaceful, almost magical, but something was about to change. As she hiked, she heard a faint sound, a soft cry that seemed to come from deep in the trees. At first, she thought it was just the wind or an animal, but the sound continued. It was unmistakable. Someone was in trouble. Without thinking, Sarah dropped her pack and started moving toward the sound, her heart racing. She had no idea who or what she would find, but her instincts kicked in. Someone needed help, and she couldn't just ignore it. She pushed through the brush, her mind focused on the cry that echoed through the trees. It was faint, but it was there, and it spurred her forward. As she got closer, the sound became clearer, a human voice, weak but desperate. She quickened her pace, her boots pounding against the dirt path, each step filled with urgency. When she reached the source of the sound, Sarah stopped dead in her tracks. There, lying at the base of a steep cliff, was a man. His clothes were torn, his face covered in dirt and bruises. He was unconscious, his breathing shallow. It was clear that he had been there for some time, struggling to survive. Sarah's heart pounded as she rushed to his side. She checked for a pulse, relieved to find that he was still alive. His injuries appeared to be serious, but she didn't have time to assess them fully. Her first priority was to keep him alive. She quickly removed her jacket and used it to try and stabilize his head, making sure he was in a safe position. With the limited supplies she had, she did what she could to help, but she knew she needed more. She thought about what to do next. Should she try to carry him to safety? Should she head back to the nearest ranger station for help? But the decision was made for her when the man's eyes fluttered open. His gaze was confused and distant, as if he couldn't quite grasp what was happening. Sarah bent down, speaking softly to him, telling him he was going to be okay. But she didn't expect what would happen next. The faint smile that appeared on his lips before he passed out again, as if relieved that someone had finally found him. This was just the beginning of something neither Sarah nor the stranger could have ever imagined. Sarah's heart raced as she knelt beside the man, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to assess his condition. The moment she had seen him lying there, bruised and unconscious, something inside her had clicked. She couldn't just leave him there. The quiet solitude she had been seeking for days had suddenly turned into an urgent mission, a mission to save a stranger. She checked for his pulse once more. It was faint, but it was there. Relief washed over her, even if it was temporary. He was alive. But what now? What should she do next? The wilderness wasn't the safest place to be in such a condition. With no cell service and no easy way to call for help, Sarah realized she would have to do everything herself. She remembered the first aid training she had taken years ago, but this was no ordinary cut or scrape. This was a serious situation, and it felt like so much more was at stake. Taking a deep breath, Sarah focused on the immediate task at hand, stabilizing him. She grabbed her water bottle and gently dabbed his face with a wet cloth. His skin was clammy and his breathing was shallow. He was alive, but for how long? She didn't want to think about it. She just had to act and fast. The wilderness was quiet, save for the occasional bird call or the rustling of leaves in the breeze. It was a stark contrast to the noise in Sarah's head. Her mind raced as she tried to think of a plan. She needed to get him back to civilization, but the nearest help was miles away. How was she going to manage this on her own? She scanned the area around her. The cliffs on either side of the narrow path created a natural boundary, making it hard to know where to go. The man was heavy, and Sarah knew she couldn't carry him very far. Her best option was to stay put, keep him as comfortable as possible, and wait for help. But how long could they afford to wait? A sharp wind blew through the trees, rustling the leaves and sending a chill through her bones. She hugged her jacket tighter around her body, her thoughts clouded by worry. What if no one found them? What if it was too late for him? She didn't want to think like that, but the reality of the situation started to settle in. Sarah's mind kept drifting back to her son, at home and unaware of the chaos she was facing. She had promised herself this trip would be her chance to recharge, to reconnect with herself. Yet here she was, putting everything on the line for a stranger she had just met. It wasn't the peaceful getaway she had imagined, but somehow she didn't mind. Helping him felt right, but would it be enough? The man groaned softly, bringing her back to the present. She quickly moved to his side, her hands gently resting on his shoulders. His eyelids fluttered, and he slowly opened his eyes. His gaze was blurry at first, but it slowly focused on Sarah's face. "Hey," she said softly, trying to keep her voice calm and reassuring. "You're safe." "You're okay." His lips moved, but no sound came out. Sarah leaned in closer, her heart pounding. Can you hear me? What's your name? The man's face contorted as if he was struggling to find the energy to speak. He let out a weak breath, his lips trembling. After a moment, he whispered, barely audible, Ethan. Ethan, Sarah repeated, her voice gentle. I'm Sarah. I found you. You're going to be okay. Ethan's eyes fluttered, closed again, and for a moment, Sarah feared he might slip back into unconsciousness. But then his hand twitched, reaching out weakly toward her. She took his hand in hers, giving it a gentle squeeze. Ethan, you need to stay awake, okay? Just a little longer, she urged, her voice firm but kind. He opened his eyes once more, his pupils dilated and his breath labored. I'm sorry, he whispered. Don't apologize, just focus on staying awake, Sarah said, trying to steady his breathing. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing on her. She had to keep him awake. She couldn't let him fall unconscious again, not when she was so close to getting him help. But her mind kept returning to the same question. How was she going to get him out of here? The trail she had been following was too narrow for a stretcher, and Ethan wasn't in any condition to walk. Sarah felt the knot in her stomach tighten. She had no choice but to carry him somehow. The only way to save him was to move him, quickly. She looked around once again, considering her options. The nearest road was far off, beyond a ridge that she had passed earlier that morning. It would take hours to get there, maybe even more. And she didn't have that much time. She needed to think of something faster. Ethan stirred again, his weak voice breaking through Sarah's thoughts. I'm not going to make it, am I? The question hung heavy in the air, and for a moment, Sarah didn't know how to answer. She couldn't promise him something she wasn't sure she could deliver. But what she could promise was that she wouldn't give up. She wasn't about to let him die out here, not on her watch. No, Sarah said softly but firmly. You're not giving up. You're going to make it, Ethan. We're going to get out of here. He nodded weakly, his eyes half closed again. Sarah took a deep breath, steadying herself. There was no room for doubt. She had to stay calm for both their sakes. Taking one more look around, Sarah spotted a large, flat rock near the base of the cliff. It wasn't much, but it would give her a little more leverage. She gently lifted Ethan's upper body, propping him up against the rock to keep him from slipping into unconsciousness. She stood up and took a few steps back, trying to gather her thoughts. She needed to get him out of here, but she wasn't sure how to do it without further injuring him. She was alone, and she had no supplies. The weight of the situation bore down on her, but she shook it off. There was no time for hesitation. She had to act. Sarah decided to try and help Ethan walk. She knew it would be slow and painful, but it was the only way to get him to safety. She crouched beside him and gently helped him to his feet. He groaned in pain, but managed to stay standing. Together, they took a few shaky steps forward. The first few steps were slow, but with everyone, Sarah felt a spark of hope. They could do this. They had to. The trail ahead was still long, but Sarah wasn't about to stop. She kept her focus on Ethan, watching him carefully, making sure he didn't collapse. He seemed to be getting weaker with each step, but he kept moving, for her sake, for both their sakes. They walked for hours, the trail becoming steeper and harder to navigate. Ethan was barely able to keep up, but Sarah kept encouraging him, telling him to take it one step at a time. She carried him when she could, and when he couldn't walk anymore, she led him along the path, her arm around his shoulders for support. Every now and then, Sarah would stop, checking for any signs of life beyond the trail. She knew she was pushing her limits, but she couldn't stop now. She wasn't about to let Ethan slip away, not when she had gotten this far. Finally, as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the trees, they reached a ridge. From there, Sarah could see a road in the distance, faint but visible. It was their way out, and it was close enough now to give her a glimmer of hope. She smiled at Ethan, her tired eyes meeting his. We're almost there, she whispered. Just a little longer. Ethan gave her a faint smile in return, his breath ragged. Thank you, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Sarah squeezed his hand, her resolve stronger than ever. She wasn't giving up now, not when they were so close. They continued on, one step at a time, their journey far from over but closer than ever to salvation. By the time Sarah and Ethan reached the road, the sun was sinking lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the landscape. The cool evening breeze made Sarah shiver, but she didn't stop. They were so close now. Every step, every ounce of energy Sarah had left was pushing them forward. She could see the faint outline of a car in the distance, parked along the road, an unmistakable sign of civilization. Ethan's breathing was labored, and his body trembled in her arms. Sarah kept her hand firmly around his shoulder, supporting him as they continued to move. Despite the weight of exhaustion, she kept whispering words of encouragement to him, trying to keep his mind focused on the end goal. "We're almost there, Ethan." "Just a little bit longer," Sarah said softly, keeping her voice calm, even though she felt like she might collapse at any moment. Ethan nodded weakly, his face pale and strained. His legs wobbled beneath him, and he could barely keep his balance, but he wasn't giving up. Neither of them was. The road ahead was their lifeline, and with every step they took, they were one step closer to safety. As they reached the edge of the road, Sarah looked around for any sign of help. There were no cars in sight, but she could hear the distant sound of a truck engine humming down the road. The noise was faint, but it gave Sarah a sliver of hope. She quickly helped Ethan sit on a large rock nearby and knelt down beside him. "Ethan, stay here. I'm going to flag down that truck," Sarah said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. She patted him gently on the arm before standing up and taking a few steps toward the road. Her heart was racing as she waved her arms, hoping the truck driver would see her. Her legs felt like lead and her body ached, but she couldn't let up now. They were so close. She could see the headlights of the truck coming closer, the sound growing louder. She took a deep breath, willing herself to stay calm. Finally, the truck came into view, a large vehicle with a flashing light on top. The driver slowed down, noticing Sarah standing in the middle of the road. When he came to a stop, she rushed over to the window, her words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "Please, my friend." "He's hurt, we need help," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. The driver, a middle-aged man with a concerned look on his face, immediately got out of the truck and walked toward Ethan. Sarah felt a sense of relief wash over her, but it was brief. Ethan was still weak, and Sarah knew they weren't out of danger yet. The man knelt beside Ethan, checking his vitals and asking questions. "What happened to him?" the driver asked Sarah. "He got lost, fell down a cliff." "He's been out here for days," Sarah explained, her voice shaking with exhaustion. She could feel the weight of everything finally hitting her. She had done all she could. Now it was up to the professionals. The driver nodded, understanding the severity of the situation. "We'll get him help, don't worry. I'll take him to the nearest clinic." Sarah nodded gratefully, tears welling up in her eyes. She couldn't hold them back any longer. She had been so focused on getting Ethan to safety, on making sure he survived, that she hadn't allowed herself to break down. But now, with help on the way, she felt the tension she had carried for so long finally start to ease. The truck driver carefully helped Ethan into the truck, making sure he was secure before climbing into the driver's seat. Sarah climbed in beside him, exhausted but grateful. As the truck pulled away from the road, Sarah glanced over at Ethan. He was still unconscious, but his breathing had become more steady. A wave of relief washed over her as she realized he was going to be okay. The ride to the clinic felt long, though it was only a few miles. Sarah's mind kept replaying the events of the day, the search for Ethan, the struggle to keep him awake, the endless hours of walking and pushing herself past the point of exhaustion. She couldn't believe how much had happened in such a short amount of time. She was just a single mom, trying to find some peace in the wilderness, and yet she had ended up saving someone's life. Ethan stirred slightly during the ride, his eyes fluttering open. Sarah leaned forward, her heart lifting as she saw him awake again. "Ethan," she asked gently, placing a hand on his arm. His gaze was unfocused at first, but as his surroundings became clearer, he looked at her with a weak smile. You saved me," he whispered hoarsely. Sarah smiled back, though her smile was tired. "You're going to be fine," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Ethan nodded, his eyes closing once more as he drifted back into unconsciousness. Sarah watched him carefully, relieved that he was stable for now. The driver glanced over at her, his expression sympathetic. "We're almost there. Don't worry," he said reassuringly. Sarah nodded, grateful for his kindness. She was too tired to say much more, but she appreciated the quiet comfort the driver provided. After what felt like an eternity, the clinic finally came into view. The truck slowly pulled up to the front entrance, where a nurse and a doctor were waiting. They immediately rushed over to help Ethan out of the truck. Sarah followed behind, her legs feeling like jelly. She was so close to collapsing, but she couldn't. Not yet. She needed to make sure Ethan was going to be okay first. The doctors quickly took Ethan inside, and Sarah was left standing outside, feeling like she had just run a marathon. Her hands trembled and her body felt like it was made of stone. But even though her body was exhausted, her mind was racing. Had she done enough? Had she really saved him? A nurse approached Sarah, offering her a bottle of water and a seat. Sarah gratefully accepted both, her mind still reeling from the past few hours. She had helped Ethan, but now that he was in the hands of professionals, there was nothing more she could do. She sat quietly, sipping the water, waiting for the doctor to give her an update. It wasn't long before the doctor came out, a serious expression on his face. Sarah stood up immediately, her heart in her throat. "How is he?" she asked, her voice trembling. The doctor gave her a reassuring smile. "He's going to be okay. We got to him just in time. He's weak, but we've got him stabilized. With a little rest and care, he'll make a full recovery." Sarah exhaled sharply, feeling the weight of the world lift off her shoulders. She had done it. She had saved him. The doctor continued, "You did a good job getting him here. Without your quick thinking and determination, he might not have made it." Sarah's heart swelled with pride, even though she was still too exhausted to fully process what had just happened. She had saved a life, a stranger's life. It was something she hadn't expected when she set out on her trip, but now it was something she would never forget. The doctor assured her that Ethan would need a few more hours of rest before he could leave the clinic. Sarah nodded, feeling a sense of peace knowing he was in good hands. She didn't have to worry anymore. As she sat down, waiting to hear that Ethan was fully awake and on his way to recovery, Sarah reflected on the events of the day. She had started her journey looking for peace, a break from the chaos of everyday life. Instead, she had found something much more meaningful: the power of compassion, the importance of helping others, and the realization that even in the most unexpected moments, we can make a difference. Sarah's trip had turned into something she never could have imagined. And though she had been through more than she ever expected, she was grateful. She had not only found peace in the wilderness, but had also discovered the power of human connection and the deep, life-changing impact of helping someone in need. Hours passed as Sarah sat quietly in the waiting area of the clinic, her mind racing with a mix of emotions. Her body was still weary from the journey, her legs aching and her stomach growling from hunger, but she didn't care. Ethan was safe now, and that was all that mattered. The clinic was small but comfortable, the faint smell of antiseptic lingering in the air. The soft hum of fluorescent lights filled the silence, and every so often, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. The nurse who had given Sarah water earlier came by with a warm blanket and some food. She smiled kindly as she handed them over, but Sarah barely noticed. Her thoughts were consumed with Ethan and the overwhelming sense of responsibility she had felt during the past hours. It had all happened so quickly, but it felt like a lifetime. She had pulled him from the edge of death, guided him through the wilderness, and now he was going to be okay. But the journey wasn't over yet. She needed to know what happened next. Her mind kept circling back to the moment when Ethan had whispered to her, just before he fell unconscious again. "You saved me," he had said, his voice so weak but full of gratitude. Sarah could still hear the sound of his words in her mind, and it made her heart swell. She had done something she never imagined she would, something that would change both of their lives forever. The nurse returned shortly after, her face more serious this time. "The doctor would like to speak with you," she said, her tone gentle but urgent. Sarah stood up quickly, her legs still sore but manageable. She followed the nurse down the hallway, her heart pounding as she approached the doctor's office. She had been waiting for this moment, the moment when she would learn how Ethan was doing and what to expect. The doctor, a middle-aged woman with a calm demeanor, stood up from behind her desk when Sarah entered. She gestured for Sarah to sit in the chair opposite her, and Sarah did so, her nerves causing her hands to fidget in her lap. "Sarah," the doctor began, her voice warm and reassuring. "Ethan is stable now. We've managed to treat his injuries and he's responding well to the treatment. But I want to explain a few things to you." Sarah nodded, her mind racing as she listened intently. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear the doctor's words until now. "Of course," she said softly. "Ethan's injuries were serious, especially the dehydration and the fall he took. He was very close to being in a critical condition when you found him. But he's strong, and that's worked in his favor. We're keeping him here for a few more days for observation, but I'm confident that he'll make a full recovery," the doctor explained. A sense of relief washed over Sarah, but it didn't fully erase the lingering worry in her chest. "Is there anything else I should know? Anything I need to do for him?" The doctor paused for a moment, her expression thoughtful. He'll need plenty of rest and fluids over the next few days. His body is exhausted and he needs time to heal, but emotionally he may struggle. Being out there alone in the wilderness for so long, especially in that condition, can take a toll. He may feel some trauma, and it's important to give him time to process everything. Sarah listened carefully, her heart heavy with the weight of the situation. She had been focused on the physical survival part, making sure Ethan stayed alive long enough to get help. But now she realized there was so much more to his experience. Ethan wasn't just physically hurt, he was mentally and emotionally drained too. The journey he had been on was one of survival, but it had been more than that. It had been a fight for hope, for life. "Is he awake? Can I see him?" Sarah asked, her voice quiet but filled with concern. The doctor smiled kindly. "Yes, he's awake now, though he's still very tired. You can see him for a short time. He might not be very talkative, but it'll do him good to have someone he can trust near him." Sarah's heart lifted at the thought of seeing Ethan again. She had been so focused on getting him help that she hadn't had a chance to really speak with him after everything had happened. She needed to hear more, to understand the depth of what he had gone through. Maybe then she could make sense of the connection they had shared, the bond that had formed between them in such a short time. The doctor led her to Ethan's room, a small, dimly lit space with a bed in the center and an IV drip connected to Ethan's arm. He was propped up against the pillows, his eyes closed as if he was resting, though his chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm. His face was still pale, but he looked better than he had earlier. His breathing was deep and even, and Sarah could see that the worst was behind him. She quietly entered the room, her footsteps light, not wanting to disturb the peace. When Ethan heard her, he opened his eyes slowly, and for a moment they just stared at each other. Sarah smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for this moment. "You're awake," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. Ethan gave a small smile, though it was tinged with weariness. "Yeah," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I'm awake, thanks to you." Sarah's heart swelled with warmth at his words, and she sat down beside his bed. She could see that he was exhausted, physically and mentally, but there was something in his eyes that told her he was more than just relieved. He was changed. And so was she. "I don't know what I would have done without you," Ethan continued, his voice quieter now. "I didn't think anyone was going to find me. I thought I was done for." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat, but she held back the tears. "You're strong, Ethan. I did what anyone would have done." Ethan shook his head, his eyes filled with gratitude. "No, Sarah. What you did, that was more than just helping someone. You saved my life. You gave me a chance." His words hit her harder than she expected. She hadn't been thinking about it like that. She had simply done what felt right, what she knew she had to do. But hearing him say those words, hearing the depth of his gratitude, made her realize how truly profound their connection had been. It was more than just a rescue. It had been a moment of human kindness, a moment when two strangers had relied on each other to survive. "I'm just glad I was there," Sarah said softly, her voice trembling slightly. Ethan gave her a weak smile, his eyes softening. "You're more than just a rescuer, Sarah. You're someone who brought me back from the edge, and I won't forget that." The room fell silent as the weight of his words settled between them. Sarah didn't know what to say, but in that moment, words didn't seem to matter. What had happened between them, what they had shared, was something that went beyond language. It was an understanding. A bond forged in the fire of survival, in the quiet moments when one person reaches out to another in their darkest hour. As Sarah sat there, watching Ethan rest, she couldn't help but reflect on how much this experience had changed her too. She had come to the wilderness to escape, to find peace, but what she had found instead was something far more meaningful. She had saved a life, yes, but she had also learned something about herself. She had learned that even in the most unexpected moments, she was capable of more than she realized. She had the strength to face anything, no matter how difficult or unknown. And she had the power to make a difference in someone else's life, even if it was just one person at a time. Ethan drifted back into a peaceful sleep, and Sarah remained by his side, quietly watching over him. The night was falling outside the window, and the clinic was growing quieter, but Sarah didn't mind the silence. It felt like the calm after a storm, the calm that comes when you know the worst is behind you, and everything is going to be okay. Days passed, and Sarah found herself visiting Ethan every day. Each time she walked into the clinic room, she felt a sense of relief wash over her. He was getting stronger with every visit, his color returning to his face, his eyes less tired. The doctors were pleased with his recovery, and every time they spoke, it was clear that Ethan was on his way to making a full recovery. Despite his improvement, Sarah could tell that Ethan wasn't quite the same person he had been before the accident. There was a quiet sadness in his eyes, a depth to his gaze that hinted at something more than physical exhaustion. But Sarah didn't push him to talk about it. She knew that he had been through a lot, too much, really. The physical pain was one thing, but the emotional weight he had been carrying for days in the wilderness was something she couldn't even imagine. Over time, Sarah and Ethan had become friends, their bond growing stronger with each conversation they had. He told her stories of his life, how he had always felt disconnected from the world. Ethan had grown up in a small town, a place where everyone knew everyone's business, but despite that, he had always felt like an outsider. He had left that town years ago, searching for something he couldn't name, only to find himself wandering the wilderness, lost in both a physical and emotional sense. "I never thought I'd end up like this," Ethan said one afternoon as they sat in his room. "I thought I was doing fine on my own, but I guess I was wrong. Being out there by myself, it made me realize how much I need people, how much I need connection." Sarah listened quietly, her heart aching for him. She understood more than he realized. Being a single mom had made her feel isolated at times too, even though she had her son and a busy life. There were moments when the loneliness crept in, when she longed for someone to talk to, someone to share her thoughts with. She had always pushed those feelings aside, focusing on what needed to be done. But now, sitting with Ethan, she understood his struggle more than she had before. Sarah said gently, "sometimes we don't realize how much we need others until we're in a situation where we can't do it alone. I think we all need to be reminded of that from time to time." Ethan gave a small smile, his eyes softening as he looked at her. "I guess I needed this, not just the accident, but meeting you. I don't know if I would have made it without you." Sarah shook her head, a smile tugging at her lips. "I just did what anyone would have done," she said modestly, though deep down, she knew that wasn't entirely true. What she had done wasn't just about physical survival. It was about something deeper, the willingness to help someone in need, to take a leap of faith and step into the unknown. It was about showing kindness when it was needed the most. The conversation drifted into comfortable silence for a few moments before Ethan spoke again. "I don't know how I can ever repay you," he said quietly, his voice full of sincerity. "I've been through so much, and I can't stop thinking about how you were there for me." "I've never met anyone like you." Sarah's heart warmed at his words. She hadn't expected any kind of repayment. In fact, the idea of being repaid didn't feel right. The act of saving him had been something she would do again in a heartbeat, without expecting anything in return. But hearing his gratitude, hearing him express how much it meant to him was enough. That was the reward, the knowledge that she had made a difference in someone's life. "You don't have to repay me, Ethan," she said softly. "I just want you to heal, to find peace with everything that's happened. That's all I want." Ethan met her gaze, his eyes filled with appreciation. "You're a good person, Sarah. I hope you know that." Sarah smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't about being good or bad. It was about doing what was right when the opportunity presented itself. But hearing Ethan say those words meant more to her than she could express. As the days went by, Ethan continued to improve, and eventually the doctor told him he was well enough to leave the clinic. Sarah felt a mix of emotions as she stood by his bedside one last time before his discharge. She was happy for him, relieved that he was going to be okay, but there was also a part of her that wasn't ready to say goodbye. Their bond had grown over the past few days, and the thought of parting ways felt strange. "Are you sure you're ready to leave?" Sarah asked, her voice gentle. Ethan nodded, a determined look in his eyes. "I am. I'm not going back to the life I had before, though. I need to change, Sarah. I've realized that I've been running from everything for so long." "But I'm not running anymore." Sarah smiled, proud of him. "That's a big step, Ethan. I'm glad to hear it." "I'm not sure what comes next," Ethan admitted, "but I know I need to find a new direction. I don't want to be lost anymore." Sarah nodded in understanding. "You'll find it. One step at a time." Before Ethan left, he turned to Sarah one last time. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything. I'll never forget what you did for me." "I won't forget either," Sarah replied, her voice full of emotion. And with that, Ethan left the clinic, walking out of the room with a new sense of purpose in his step. Sarah watched him go, her heart filled with a quiet sense of peace. She had done what she set out to do. She had helped a stranger in need. And in doing so, she had found a sense of purpose herself. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah continued with her life, but she often thought back to that moment in the wilderness when she had decided to help a man she didn't even know. It had been a defining moment, one that would stay with her forever. She had learned so much about herself, about the strength within her, and about the power of kindness. Ethan stayed in touch with Sarah after his recovery. He sent her messages from time to time, letting her know how he was doing and updating her on the changes he was making in his life. He had started a new job in a nearby town, something he had always wanted to do but never had the courage to pursue. He was working on rebuilding his life, and although the road ahead was long, he was no longer lost. Sarah was happy for him, but she also realized something important. She had saved Ethan's life, but in a way, he had saved hers too. The experience had reminded her of the importance of connection, of helping others, and of never underestimating the power of a single moment of kindness. She had stepped into the wilderness seeking peace, but what she had found was so much more, a reminder of the strength that lies within each of us and the profound impact we can have on one another. As the months passed, Sarah and Ethan's bond remained strong, even though they were no longer physically close. They continued to support each other in different ways, each of them finding their own path, but always knowing that they had been there for one another when it mattered most. In the end, it wasn't just about saving a life, it was about what that act of kindness had sparked. It was about the ripple effect of compassion, and how one person's actions could change the course of another's life forever. Sarah smiled as she thought about it, knowing that the wilderness had given her more than just a break from her busy life. It had given her a deeper understanding of herself and the power of human connection. And in doing so, it had changed both her life and Ethan's, in ways neither of them could have ever expected.